Is Jeffrey Epstein a monster? Are unsaved men really that bad? Welcome to The Conquering Truth. I'm Dan Horn.
I'm Roger Booton.
I'm Charles Churchill.
And I'm Joshua Horton.
Many people are talking about what a terrible person Jeffrey Epstein was, and there's no question that he did some really bad things, some terrible things. But at the same time, is he really that unusual? Here's a man that had a huge amount of power, huge amount of connections, huge amount of money, and so he was not constrained with the constraints that most people have. And what we see there is this is kind of what unconstrained man looks like. So when you think about Epstein and Prince Andrew and his friends, I mean, what should we expect from them?
I mean, I actually, in the blurb, I think I like the question you asked, is Jeffrey Epstein a monster? And then, as you were kind of introducing this, you kind of talked about how should we think about what an unconstrained man is like. And I think that's really important because the reason we use language like that, the reason, you see somebody, they have a serial killer, or they see someone who they look at and they say has done really what we consider to be really horrible things. And they are horrible things. But we like to use language that distances them, the person who is evil, from everybody else, as if in the sense of not even just in what they did, but in their nature, that they are in their nature something fundamentally different. And there's a real danger in that because what it does is it keeps us from considering the nature of sin, what a fallen man is like, what power, what a lack of constraint can do, like you were talking about. There's that old saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it's really easy just to forget that, though. I mean, there's a lot of people who have significant amounts of power in the world. And when your attitude about people isn't anybody can move in that direction of what we want to call a monster. And so the reason why we put constraints in, the reason why we do that is because that's true. And I think when you look at our society, we've spent the last, you could say 100 years, you could say 50 years, but there's been an acceleration of removing constraints from people's lives, removing what people can do, how free they are to pursue sin, how free they are to do what they want to do and to pursue things that are evil. And at the same time, we want to say there are these men out there who are just horrible, horrible people. And there's a real cognitive dissonance going on there, and Scripture really argues against that.
Before this podcast, we were talking about Harvey Weinstein. And one thing about him is you look and he's basically prostituting girls, right? He's saying, I'll give you a movie thing if you'll sleep with me. Well, does anybody really think that wasn't happening in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s and the 1950s? Right? I mean, it happened all along. And some of this evil that we're seeing now, we need to recognize that part of it is exposure. Part of it is that I think there's a higher percentage of people that are unconstrained. But at the same time, there were always people that were unconstrained because of the power that they had. Only now there actually is more visibility. When you only had 3 news stations, it didn't matter how many affairs JFK had. Nobody was going to hear about any of them. Didn't matter what he did. And now all of a sudden you can't do the same thing. So some of it is greater visibility and some of it is a decline of standards in our society.
Right.
And it's also just a shifting of the sexual morality and the standards that people set. Because now the standard is consent and power imbalances. And that's all the people are concerned about. So, it would be fine to do that. It would be fine to have, prostitution. A lot of people would say it's fine, other than the fact that, there typically is, or maybe some people say there inherently is a power imbalance. But the idea of relations outside marriage is not concerning to most people. And so it's just, now as things have shifted, people are trying to shift, people's behavior to match the new morals. But the new morals aren't moral. They're still wicked by God's standards, because it's tearing down marriage and trying to establish something new, saying that we're going to protect people when in fact it doesn't do that at all.
And it's the sort of thing where satisfying that type of hunger doesn't satisfy. I mean, like it's saying, we can just let people go and do that, and sin will, their sin will be sated. And the answer is no, sin always wants more, and it's always it's feeding really dangerous things, and they're acting like by doing this they can actually stop sin, and it just doesn't work that way.
And some of what's going on is that there's this You even look at what our society is doing, trying to promote transgenderism and all this other stuff, and homosexuality, and there'll be bestiality. And for a while, they were working really hard to promote polygamy, where they were having multiple wives television shows and stuff, which is how they brought lots of these concepts into mainstream. And I do think one of it is that as there gets to be more exposure, they're working hard to make wickedness, immorality, to be acceptable broadly in America, so that their immorality that has been hidden for a long time, as it comes out, it doesn't matter anymore, because now everybody's accepting it. And if you look at the elites and the direction that they're pushing a direction that's completely contrary to what most people think, right? I mean, these people that are pushing these ideas that a man in a dress is a woman, there's a reason why they're pushing these. It's just to try to twist things so much that people think that abnormal things are normal.
You asked the question, is he a monster, or is this something unusual? Well, certainly he's an evil man. He's an evil man that did lots of terrible things. But should we be surprised by it? That's the question. And what you're saying is, they're sort of pushing people to not be surprised by it. But even from a scriptural understanding of who man is, when you think about the situations that they're in, as we described, when you have, almost unlimited power, lots of money, lots of influence, lots of connections. If you don't fear God, that's the natural course that you will take, is you will pursue things that are evil.
And the things you're talking about there, you can see that in a verse like 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And so, you're talking about, people with power, people with money, people with connections. And Scripture talks about one of those things is that, that money and the love of money, the desire of it, causes many different kinds of evils to spring up. And we should not be shocked by that. Like you were saying, hasn't that been going on for a long time? The history of the world, that has been true, is that people who either desire money or people who have money, that causes them to be pulled toward certain types of evil. It is an unavoidable aspect of those who love money.
And to some extent, what it is that because you love money, you get money, and when you get money, you can then use it to protect whatever evil, because there really is strength in terms of a societal influence with money. And so if you have enough money, right? The reason that these young girls went with Epstein is because he had a lot of money and they thought they would get some of it. This is why they were going with him. He wasn't like dragging him off the street. He was seducing them because he was wealthy. He could actually bring them in and he could actually recruit them.
Or just as much as paying them a relatively small amount of money, on a one-time thing. It doesn't even have to be a lot of money that people are attracted by.
Right. But it's that whole idea that he had enough power that he could cover things up because he had money, and money equates to a certain kind of power. So, I think that we should just recognize that how much constraint comes with a society, and that's a real blessing that there's those constraints. And as those constraints break down, like the elites are deliberately and intentionally working to cause them to break down in the United States. There's no question about that, what they've been pushing for the last 20 or 30 years. They've been trying to break down every moral constraint, because those moral constraints, they're constraining them, and probably in ways that didn't used to constrain them. Because if you have control of, there's a handful of people that control all the newspapers, all the media, stories aren't going to get out unless you somehow get on the wrong side of one of those people. And now all of a sudden stories get out anyway. And so you have to then promote it and talk about these things that are obviously barbaric and wicked. Just the things that are being pushed on our children in this country. You have to make evil acceptable, which means that you have to break down these constraints that used to just constrain everybody but the elite, and now they're constraining everybody. They're starting to constrain the elites. Even think about like Bill Gates being known that he was on Epstein's plane and stuff. That starts to affect other things that he's doing. Even though he has billions of dollars, he still couldn't protect his reputation, because there were people that knew that he went on the plane with Epstein.
It worked for a period of time to suppress some information. And I think that's part of when you talk about that the constraints of society changes at different times, and there's different ways that society constrains sin. And we've talked before, like technology is a good example. For a long period of time, there was no way, if you were having a meeting with someone, it's very difficult for an average person to go in and record someone if you're in the 1920s, if you're in the 1930s, you're in the 1940s, but all of a sudden,
1970s.
Yeah, so say I was going to go all the way up to the 1990s, really. I mean, until you get up.
Unless you're
you have
Nixon.
cassette players. But.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is even at that point, it's still a relatively bulky thing to try to pull off.
You had to carry a backpack or a briefcase, yes.
Right, and so now you get into. I mean, now it's very easy to. It's very hard to actually find out if someone is recording you. You actually have to spend a decent amount of effort to make sure they're not recording you. And so you have this sudden shift in things. And so you can see how the societal structure, even though people want to sin, and there are groups of people who have a lot of power, there are changes that can make that very difficult, that can suddenly make it much harder than it used to be. And so I think people just need to think about how the depth of that works. It's like you were saying before, it's not this simple thing. It's a very complex arrangement of different powers, different forces, different possibilities that really constrain them.
And I do think it's worth going back to Scripture and just to think about some of the things that were considered acceptable, or not acceptable, but they happened. They were real things. Like, one of the stories I was thinking of was Lot and his daughters from Genesis 19:30 through 36. Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. I mean, think about that. That's, this is the reverse of the Epstein thing, effectively, right? I mean, Epstein was luring young girls in. Here's women that are luring their father into having sexual relationships with them. And these were the people that were saved from Sodom and Gomorrah, right? These were the ones that the angel took out by their hand. And this is how depraved they are. And I think we just don't think about it as, except for the effect of the gospel, we shouldn't think we'd be any different. And Epstein wasn't affected by the gospel because he was immune to the effects of society in a lot of ways because of his money and because of his power. So he didn't have those constraints. And it's easy to think, oh, he's a monster, instead of thinking, I'd be like him if I had the same position.
And I think that situation, what you see in that situation as well, too, is you look at the web of people around him who were involved, and you look at the power structure in the United States, you look at politics. I mean, in many ways, rightfully so, a lot of people are upset that so much of that information is not coming out. But it feels like a room full of people with everybody has a loaded gun pointing at someone else's head. And they're just saying, okay, who's going to pull the trigger first? Because it just seems like it's a house of cards that if one person, you release something about one person, okay, well, then they're going to release, everybody, it seems, or a lot of people are guilty, and nobody wants it out because they thought that their money and their influence and their prestige would protect them.
Well, what I think was really interesting about when you're reading that story about Lot, because you've been talking about the constraints of society. And in that story, it's very clear that what the girls were saying is if we were still living in the city, we wouldn't even think of doing this. Like, it probably wouldn't even occurred to them to do
even
this.
in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. But all of a sudden, they're in this other place, and they go, well, this is the only way we're going to be able to have children. So literally their whole thinking shifts. And I think I remember being a kid, and I'm trying to remember when it happened, but I remember some guy came through to our school, and he was looking for girls to come and model for things, and I remember my parents just going, that guy's bad news. I'm not, and I'm like, well, how do you, and I'm How do you know? How do you know what his intentions are? And they're like, look, he's probably going to take, they didn't say all this now, but I'm kind of thinking back through, basically is he wants to take a young girl and remove her into a girl who would never think about changing her clothes in the constraints where she's going to do it, where he's going to need her to do it. She's never going to think about her body in her family the way she would. He's going to take her in this other place and put her in a scenario where this is normal, maybe with other people, and that's what they do, and that's how because it's not a big deal to change clothes just behind the screen where the guy can actually see you, but and it's not, and who cares, and maybe there'll be some pictures taken, and all of those, that's literally moving someone to another culture where these constraints are removed, and people no longer think, hey, that's part of what actually keeps me from being caught up in evil. It keeps me from desiring evil. There's no, but we just don't think about what that's like.
I know somebody who was, there when they were pretty young. I think that it was at public school that they were advertising that they would do glamour shots for like 5-year-olds. And they basically, it was a very sexualized picture of a 5-year-old. And this was being promoted in public school. I mean, this is how sick it is. And we think, it's just a glamour shot. Look at how beautiful they look. No, you're dressing up a 5-year-old like she's a grown woman. This is a huge problem. And a lot of parents in America don't think that's a huge problem at all, partly because they don't recognize their own depravity.
Right.
But they want to pretend.
Try shopping for clothes for a young girl.
Or maybe, this was worse than that. But maybe...
Probably then, maybe not then now, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. But I mean, you look at it and you consider it and you go, this is some of the people are even looking at it going, well, I see that I have those desires, but other people are innocent. And that's one of the reasons, back to, Jeffrey Epstein being considered a monster, is so that you can kind of go, well, I have some of those same feelings, but other people don't. He's really unusual, and I'd always be constrained because I'd never do that because I'd get in such trouble. It would cause such disaster in my life. And they forget the fact that the guy taking the pictures is the same way. He's as depraved. He's if he doesn't have constraints, he's going to walk around that screen like you said. I mean, if he thinks he can get away with it, he will. Right. And depending on the girl, some girls he'd be able to get away with it, and some he wouldn't, because some would be too ashamed to say anything. And some might want him to, right? So there would be a whole level. So he brings them in, and then he plays it by ear and sees what he can get away with. Yeah. It's a vetting system. And this is what happens all the time. And people think they want to start by thinking people are good. Well, if people are good, then you have to see Jeffrey Epstein as a monster. If you think people are, as the Bible describes them, desperately wicked, then you think of Jeffrey Epstein as somebody who doesn't have constraint of the society upon him.
Right. I mean, this is a conversation I've had with my wife a number of times when we'll get work done at the house. And when the worker comes over, I generally do try to be at the house. There's things, but there are times where you can't always be there. And she's kind of like, and so there's just part of it where I've had to walk her through literally this conversation. There's this part of it where it's like, look, I've got the guy's name. I know the company that he's working for. I know how long so for him to do something, there has to be this, he's not in a position where he has just freedom to randomly do something. He's known where he is. He's going to lose his job. He already has his, he's been ID'd, all these different things. Those are constraints. And so it's not even like you think he's necessarily coming in thinking anything, but you want to go, if he did think something, does he have the freedom to operate, or does he not have the freedom to operate? And you want to actually naturally think about those sort of things. And I remember it was a girl that I used to work with who told me about the number of times she was in places growing up where she realized the person she was riding with was deciding whether to take her and rape her or not. Where she was young, she left home, she was in places that weren't necessarily the best for her. She ended up being in a car with somebody else driving or someone, and nobody else knew that she was with them, and they're driving together, and she goes, I could watch the guy debating what he was going to do. And I'm trying to think, what information can I give him to push him towards it? And I think we want to say, oh, that's rare. And the answer is you can make it rare.
And part of it is that, and people go the other side, which is you can't make it where it's better to meet a bear out in the woods than meeting a man out in the woods.
Right.
Right? I mean, this is one of the things. And the reality is there are ways to constrain it, unless society decides that it shouldn't be constrained, right? This is, and just to make sure people see this is, you look at California when they made it so that you could steal basically up to $950, I think it was, without it being a felony, and that they weren't going to prosecute it. What happens? Everybody starts stealing. It's not that they didn't have a desire to steal before. They did. They didn't change. But the law all of a sudden said you can get away with it. And because they could get away with it, then they started to do it. And this is how a lot of things work. And Jeffrey Epstein's in the case where he goes, I can get away with it.
Right. And unlike you're saying, the way the society is structured has a big impact on this how prevalent this stuff is. Like I forget the exact numbers, but I think a huge issue with child abuse is where there's the woman gets divorced and then she brings a boyfriend in to live with her, and that's a huge percentage of what because then it's it's not his own child, and so he doesn't feel that constraint. Not that everyone has that constraint, unfortunately, but I mean that is just opening it up to a whole plethora of evil that if marriage was stronger, it wouldn't be there. That situation just wouldn't happen to the same extent.
And the men are looking for women a certain group of men are looking for women that they can prey on, that they know that woman's not going to turn them in, even though she knows she's not going to turn them in because she's desperate to have a boyfriend. So you look for somebody desperate enough, and then you can commit pedophilia with their daughter or their son because they know this is the state that the woman's in. I mean, when we found this stuff at Voice of the Martyrs, back then I was shocked. I've become more realistic since then. But there was a bunch of girls that their mothers, I know, that they knew that they were being molested by Isaac, the head of the orphanage, that Voice of the Martyrs USA knew about too. It's not like that was hidden from them. They knew all about it as well. But they knew that these mothers would do nothing because they would prostitute their daughter for $20 a month. And they knew that they wouldn't do anything.
Because it was support that the orphanage sent to them, right?
Not the orphanage. Voice of the Martyrs sent to them.
Okay.
Voice of the Martyrs sent them $20 a month, and so they can molest the daughter in the Stevens Center. The mother wouldn't say anything. Who else is the daughter going to go to? Because the $20 a month was worth more than their daughter in their eyes. And so you have this, we look, and it's easy to pretend like these things aren't out there. But this is exactly how people are. That the society there doesn't even look at it that bad.
And put it in perspective, the average person there in Nigeria, made $300 a year?
Something like that.
And so if you get $240 a year above it, you might go and do some levels of work. So, there's just part of it where the majority of your
middle
income,
class, which is a very poor middle class, but you're middle class.
Right. And so
median income.
Without you having to go and do anything. That's a pretty significant amount of money in their eyes. We shouldn't think of it as $20 here. But at the same time, if you're sitting there going, well, that's reasonable.
Who cares about my daughter because I want
Right.
to be able to live an easy life. That's what they're saying. And because their society wouldn't do anything about it, they weren't afraid. And because Voice of the Martyrs wouldn't do anything about it, and Isaac wouldn't do anything about it. He was the one molesting them. All these people, everybody knew that nobody was going to get caught. It was real work to get anybody to pay attention because the mothers were happy to prostitute their daughters. And we go, no, people aren't like that. Yes, they are. They pass their children through the fire. Yes, they are. They murder babies at abortion clinics day by day by day. They actually are that evil.
And if you look throughout history, if you think about, okay, you have people that have power and money. Well, throughout most of history, if you were a king or a chief or a ruler, you would do a lot of these things that they're doing now. You wouldn't even think twice about it. It wouldn't be a scandal. You would just do it because you're the king.
And the other people would expect you to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's this part of it where, they'd be very surprised. It would be very weird on their part if you didn't do it because that's what people with power did.
And it's not just these people that might seem like they have a lot of power, but I think it's important not to be naive about a lot of the things that people see as commonplace. Of course, there's so many youth pastors who get in trouble or need to get in trouble for doing this stuff. And so
unfortunately, not enough of them do.
Right, they need to, but a lot of them do, and even more need to. But I mean, so if youth group is a whole different situation. But if there is a youth group, the youth pastor should not be developing and saying, "Oh, I need to, mentor your daughter." Like, no, that we can't be naive and say, "Oh, he must be, he's a normal person, he's a good Christian." Like, no, good Christians realize I don't need to be doing that. I need to stay away from that. And we can't give people a pass and let them get away with more because we think they have a good relationship. And, I mean, you can stretch that out to all the, all kinds of other situations that, where it came out with like all these gymnasts were being, molested by their gym coach. I mean,
wasn't it the
doctor.
team doctor?
Doctor.
Yeah.
I'm sure both have happened, but I mean,
but the one that got caught is the team doctor.
But you're sending young women into these, or girls into these situations. It's not, where they're unprotected, they're vulnerable. We need to not just assume that the average person is going to be honest and upright. Not that you are suspecting everyone is evil, but you just take reasonable precautions.
You don't suspect it, you know it.
Right, completely evil. But
you don't know that they're unconstrained. You know they're evil. But one thing, I mean, talking about the girl gymnast, right? I mean, that doctor had the ability to remove them so that they couldn't compete. He would just say they had something wrong with them, and then they couldn't compete. And so their parents, everybody else, it's not that much different than the women in Nigeria that prostitute their daughters, is because he has so much power and they so much want their daughter to be the gymnast that everybody closes their eyes and they let it get away with it. So it's really easy for us to look at Nigeria and go, how could they do that? Which was kind of my response when I found out about it. And now I kind of go, it happens all over the place. We just don't see it that way.
And of course, what are they trying to do as a gymnast? What's the end goal? You're the top gymnast. It means you get to appear on worldwide TV wearing skin-tight clothing, doing all... I mean, the whole thing from the top to the bottom has serious issues. I mean, it's not a...
You feel like it's like grooming dressed up as, Like,
right.
Hey, if we wanted to spend time with a bunch of girls wearing skimpy clothing, what could we do to make that sound reasonable?
Ice skating. Oh, figure skating. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it is this. It is, and you shouldn't think it was necessarily that straightforward in the sense that they sat around and said this. But in the end, you shouldn't be surprised that there are people who have certain desires. That's what drove some of these things. That's what. I mean, there is. I can't remember which sport it is right now, but there's one where the girls have asked if they can wear longer clothing, and the sport will not allow them.
I think it's volleyball.
I think I wanted to say it was volleyball too, but I just and the sport is like, no, you cannot. You know what I mean? And it's like
they know that's TV viewers, that's dollars. They know.
Right. And so and they come up with these other reasons for it, but in the end, that is the real reason.
Right, and so they all want to pretend that people are trying to watch the sport when the reality is that a lot of the guys watching, they want to watch the women bounce around out there in skimpy clothing.
Right.
This stuff's been going on for a long time. Again, it is the nature of man. Like Muhammad, when he was, I think he had 16 wives, which is a problem to begin with, but he also had a wife that he married her, betrothed to her when she was 6, and he consummated the marriage when she was 9. I mean, Muhammad had huge power in that society, so there was no constraint on his evil, even though he was a quote-unquote religious leader. That doesn't stop the evil. This is why you have sex scandal after sex scandal after sex scandal. This is the Ravi Zacharias, right? That, I need to release this sexual tension that I have. How else can I minister to God? And people buy this garbage because they want to feed their own lusts. They want to feed their own desires. It's not like that one party's innocent. Both of them are depraved.
And it's a mark of a lot of new religious cults or groups. I mean, like Muhammad, like Joseph Smith, suddenly, so strangely, he gets a vision that he needs to be polygamous, and actually secretly, not even tell the woman's husband. God told him to do this. And I was reading a book by a guy like, it seemed like he was really convicted of this. He wasn't a Mormon, but he was like, maybe, who knows how he got to this. Like, no, we know why he did that. It's not rocket science. Like, Yeah,
Do we even know why he took another man's wife? Because it's the same reason David did. I mean, he knew Uriah was married to Bathsheba. Right? It's not like it was a secret.
He was one of his mighty men. I mean,
Right.
like when you read that, it's like a knife in the heart. You know what I mean? It's like, Uriah had eaten with David in the field. You know what I mean? They had probably fought together.
But David didn't want to feel constrained by Moors. He wanted to go, look, I'm above everything. And this is what happens. And we shouldn't sit back without the work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. We shouldn't sit back and think we'd be any different at all. And we should not be naive and stupid and pretend like our children are any different. They're not any different unless God has saved them, unless he has given them a heart of flesh instead of the heart of stone. They'd be a Jeffrey Epstein if they could.
And once they're saved, don't think that they're not without temptation to sin. You know what I mean? It's like there's this, and you can't go, I'm so sure of my child's sin that I'm so sure of my child's salvation that I don't have to worry about temptation with him. That's just a foolish position to hold to.
And if we think about how it would apply to us, I think it was Paul Washer gave this example of if there was a movie that played in a screen in a room full of people of all the thoughts you've had, you would run out of there immediately. I mean, so just our thoughts. I mean, we all know that's true.
Right.
I mean, when you mentioned Muhammad, and having, I think it's 16 wives.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody...
Because he was special. Muslims are allowed to have 4, except for Muhammad. He could have 16.
16. But I mean, and if somebody was thinking at home, they may have went, oh, well, what about Solomon? Well, what about Solomon? I mean, Solomon doesn't get a pass. I mean, 1 Kings 11, 1-3. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. As much as I have no problem with the idea that God used Solomon as a picture of the gospel going to all the nations and him being like Christ who takes a bride from all the nations, Solomon's desire for foreign women was sinful. He should not have, he sinned in doing this. And his desire for them, and it says he clung to them in love. He chose women from nations that God had told him not to go to. He chose women with foreign gods because he was allured by their beauty more than he was willing to obey God. I mean, Solomon sinned, and we shouldn't think that you don't give him a pass.
And the difference between Solomon and Christ, because here Solomon is a picture of Christ, the difference between Solomon and Christ is that when Solomon went after these women, he was changed to go after the gods of those women. When Christ marries from every tribe, every tongue, every nation, their hearts come after Christ, not the other way around. So it's the reverse, but it's the same. It's the right picture. The picture is that this is the nature of Solomon. This is the nature of man, is that he's willing to chase sin as far as he can go, and it leads you to follow false gods.
Right, and you look at the book of Esther, and where Artaxerxes is looking for a new wife, so he sends his people out to find every beautiful woman in the entire empire.
I think it says beautiful virgin.
Right, well, yeah, there you go. But, I mean, that's kind of like he is in that position of near ultimate power on earth, and that's how he uses his power. I mean, that's the unconstrained sin of saying, I'm going to take them all for myself. It's not righteous in any way.
We should expect that he slept with them.
Oh, that's what it says.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was saying. That's
Yeah.
what I mean. I think there are people who try to pretend like that's not what was going on.
We should just remember how much the gospel has changed things, but it's changed things because there's light in the world. It hasn't changed the nature of man except for those who are saved. The unsaved, their nature hasn't changed. If their nature hasn't changed, they would be Solomon if they could. They would be, and they want that same role, and they want to be Jeffrey Epstein. They want to have young girls that will do anything for them because they're wealthy.
And Epstein because he's in the 21st century, he has to do things a lot more in the dark than these other people. I mean, he couldn't marry 1,000 wives. He had to be more limited in real ways.
And so we act like because God has given people eternal life, that somehow means that the nature of man changed. But the nature of man has not changed since the fall. Like it says in Romans 8:6-8, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. So then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. And the point here is, this isn't some passive thing. God says, don't sleep with little girls. And your attitude is, go sleep with little girls. You are actively an enemy of God. And it doesn't mean everybody's going to attack God in the same way. And certainly everybody doesn't have the same ability to attack God. But Epstein clearly had ways to go after God by being in rebellion to the law of God, which is what it means to be at enmity with God. As God says, here's the way the world should work, and you're going, I want to do anything against it. And that is the nature of man. Not kind of the nature of man. That is the nature of man. He is an active enemy of God.
So, yeah, this passage of Romans is saying this is the problem. This is how we're wired. This is where we're wired to be against God. And the antidote is faith in Christ. That's what changes our desire, so that we don't desire those things and then act, if the opportunity is there, go after them.
And so when Christ talked about, his people, those who have faith, that they're the salt and the light, that's what's required to stop the sin. It's not that the people are changing. It's that there's more light, there's more salt. And if there's more light and more salt, then people are constrained from the outside so they don't do these things, not because they're constrained from the inside. And I think often people lie to themselves about where their constraint comes from. They think the constraint comes from the inside. I would never do that. Well, the reality is, they got in trouble for looking at a woman wrong or whatever else. And so these things were taught into them by society, where they go, not I would never do that. That's what they say. But the reality is they go, I never would do that because I would not be willing to bear the consequences, which is fundamentally different than saying I would never do that. In Christ, when you're spiritually minded, you go, I would never do that. When you're in the flesh, you'd go, boy, I'd do that, but I don't want to bear the consequences.
Because in our flesh, there's the part of the sin that's attractive to us. Proverbs 9:17 and 18 says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of hell. I mean, if you have children, you've seen this. You see kids do something. Why would they do that? Because they were told not to do it. So they want to do it because they want to do something that is.
And there's right, and it's their father or mother. They have authority from God because they were established, and so they want to go against it because they are at enmity with God. They are at war with God, and so they're going, okay, my parent told me to do this, so therefore it's sweet if I do something I could do the same thing, right? Think of Israel when they go up to the promised land. And God says, go in there and conquer the promised land. And they go, we'll never do that. We're going to die. And then God goes, well, then I'm going to punish you. So don't go up. Now you're going to die in the wilderness. And what do the next day? They go up and they try to attack the promised land and they die. Some of them die. And so this is the attitude isn't like this middle thing where you just go, oh, I've changed my mind. No, you haven't changed your mind. God told you not to, so now you want to. When God told you to, you didn't want to. That's the nature of carnal man.
And I think some people might be questioning, why are you saying that all people have the same nature as Epstein? Why are you warning me against doing things like Epstein did? I have no desire to go, recruit, children for nefarious purposes. But the thing is, Epstein's sins were not categorically different than the ones that tempt nearly everyone. Because even you look at the group of victims that come to the congressional hearings and whatnot, and I got this off the internet. I don't know if it's 100% true, but what I was reading is that they all were their time with Epstein. They were adults. So Epstein wasn't someone just going after little children. He was wanting to go after many different women, including adult women. And so and so you might say, well, I would never do it at this level. Well, he wasn't just doing it at that level. And did he start out there? I mean, some people do, but other people, their conscience is hardened. They start out at one point saying, I know exactly how I'm going to sin. Maybe I'm just going to go on the internet and gratify my lust in certain ways. But then, I have a hard line. This is evil. But then, do they end up there? How does their conscience harden? I mean, when you are giving into sin, when you're walking in sin, you're not in complete control. You're a slave to sin. And so, I don't know if we know Epstein's progression, but he was someone who had who had wealth, who had power. And so it would be easy for someone who was just saying, I'm just going to, it's just me on my computer with this stuff that 90% of people would say is perfectly fine these days. But then if you got all that money, if you got that power, where would you end up? And if you thought you could get away with it, where would you end up? And so this is stuff that, Proverbs here is not saying don't be a pedophile. It's saying don't go down the wrong street where the immodest woman, where the harlot woman is. I mean, that's how far back from that Solomon is.
And I think when you look at it, it's easy to think, oh yeah, I watch porn, but I'd never do anything more. But how many people that are watching porn, that they're at the point where if all of a sudden it could be, well, she could be here in the room with you. You don't need to touch her or anything, but instead of watching her strip on the movie, how about just having her present? And then all of a sudden you can play the other character. And as you play it out, if you get more power and more ability to do these things without anybody knowing, the fact that you would turn it on in the first place indicates that you would go down the whole way if you could get away with it. Why would you stop?
Right.
The only reason you stop is you'd go, there's consequences. If you can protect yourself against the consequences and you go watch porn on the internet, don't think you wouldn't be Jeffrey Epstein.
Earlier I was kind of talking about how technology changes and causes it to be easier to expose evil. You're talking about how technology's changed to allow people to do evil that they could. When my dad was growing up, if he wanted to look at pornography, if he wanted to look at a video, he would have to go to one of the few stores in town that actually had it. He'd have to walk into the section of the store where they were very clearly labeled. He would have to, people could see him do that. He, if he was, even before he was a Christian, he didn't maybe want to be thought that way. Later, he was a pastor. It would have been really difficult to do those things. Now, it's not hard for anybody to find pretty much any form of pornography that caters to whatever your desires are. And like you said, so all of a sudden, the accessibility of it has changed. So whereas before the person went, I would never look at pornography, they might have sincerely thought that. The answer is they would have if it had been easier to, if all they had to do was move their mouse, and they would go, what's a mouse?
I remember growing up, right? There were movie theaters that they all were the same. They had 3 big X's on them.
Right.
And you immediately knew what kind of movie theater that was, and you knew if somebody was walking in there, why they were walking in there. I mean, and that was
the constraint in a sense.
And I think that was the only place that you could watch movies like that. I don't think there was choice number 2. I think that was it at that point in
Epstein's
time.
Island was the other one.
Well, this was way before that. Right. But it's kind of that picture is that you then turn around and act like, oh yeah, people didn't used to watch porn. No, people didn't used to want to be seen watching porn. Not that they wouldn't want to watch porn.
Right.
And so there's this shift that happens, and we shouldn't deceive ourselves, especially about what non-Christians will do. If you give your daughter over to be, if you give her over to be a gymnast, don't be surprised that the doctor molests her. We shouldn't be surprised at this. We should be realistic about what the world's like and what men and women are like and just how good the constraints are, right? Because there are real constraints in different places, right? I was talking to somebody just the other day about how, I don't usually lock my door. And he would never go into his room, in his house without locking his door. And it's like, yeah, he lives in a very different place than I do. Those constraints are different. And so you actually have to measure the constraints in the area that you're at and saying, okay, so what risk is tolerable?
And I think you see throughout the Bible that people will pursue the sin that they think is okay. So I was teaching at the nursing home the other night and had the story of Judah when his wife dies and Tamar. So Judah's wife dies, and he goes to be with he says he comforts himself. He goes with the sheep shearers. Well, then he walks past, Tamar goes to a place where prostitutes normally sit. And interestingly, he walked by there. Well, he was a widower. He gave into the lust of the flesh and says, well, I'll go up here.
Probably the only time he ever did it.
Yeah. I know what's there. So, I mean, and he knew that aside from that, it wouldn't be a big deal. He would send the kid of the goat, and that would be that.
And he would tell people, hey, go pay this prostitute this goat, right? I mean, it wasn't like, he's like, hey, go get my signet ring back. Go take this goat there. It wasn't like he was ashamed of the fact that he hired a prostitute. He wasn't ashamed at all.
And so, I mean, I want to tie a couple things together if you're thinking through this. At the beginning, what we kind of said is Epstein a monster? And one of the reasons people say that is so they can distance themselves. Understand one of the things that's going on with the Epstein case is there's going to be an attempt to focus on what is the worst possible things that could have gone on, because the desire is to make it that this unthinkable evils happened there. Now, and there probably were evils that were very bad there. I don't know. Some of them are going to be made up. And so the thing is what people need to recognize is, as a society, what God wants us to do is, instead of distancing ourselves from that, what Scripture says over and over and over is put the evil out from among you. Not use words that make you think you can't be like that evil. It's put that evil out. And so Jeffrey Epstein was probably not as bad as people are saying he was. He was plenty bad to have been put to death. He was plenty bad to be condemned to hell by God. I mean, eating a piece of fruit makes you that bad that you shouldn't eat. But I mean, let's just be really clear, though. What we want to do is we want to go, there are only a few evils in the world that are that bad. And that's just not true.
And we choose these all the time. Who's worse, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot? Probably Pol Pot and Stalin are both significantly worse than Hitler. But yet people don't think that, because Hitler was chosen to be the one that, and I'm not saying that all three of them aren't evil. I'm just saying that society builds up this story, and we built up that story so that we could go to World War II and you galvanize people, and there's propaganda involved in other things, and he was an evil man. But the point is that we didn't want to galvanize against Stalin, so we didn't do the same thing in this country. And that's what's happening with Epstein. We shouldn't deceive ourselves. The reason that they want to do it on Epstein is so that everybody goes, Epstein's an exception, not, hey, Bill Gates and Epstein are the same. Well, Bill Gates and Epstein are the same. What about all these other billionaires? Aren't they the same too? And our first thought should be, they're probably pretty close. They may not be the same, but they're probably pretty close.
And I think that's kind of the point. Is less, I mean, who knows the truth of all the bad that he did? But I think, to me at least, it's less of the point was he wasn't as bad as we're making it out. The larger point is there's a lot more people that are that bad and maybe worse than we think, and just don't make him the poster child and go, he's bad and everyone else is kind of
and would whatever. Be that bad if circumstances were a little more favorable towards them.
Because I think with this whole situation, we need to remember that there's biblical morality according to God's law. Then there is social mores of our society today, and then there's our law, in the United States of America and in the various states. And they're not all aligned. And so there's a lot of people out there who think, well, Epstein, this whole situation, we know they're covering stuff up unless we see a bunch of billionaires and politicians going to jail. Because we know he's an evil guy, and so we know, therefore, he must and his friends must go to jail. Well, actually, our laws don't fit our social mores, because most people say it's pretty bad to coerce your masseuse into immoral activities with you. That's very bad, and to do it a bunch of times. Is that necessarily illegal? I mean, some people not clearly as a lot of other things, and so that's something that where our laws don't fit what people think is horrible. But then you look at biblical morality, and we can say that things like he's giving, whatever that Harvard professor is advice on how to, get his students to sleep with him. Well, that's really evil. That that arguably is more evil than some things that our culture would take even more seriously, because there's a whole adultery element to it. And so, you need to study the Bible and see what are the actual evil things, and I mean, adultery is certainly up there, but the normal situation in the United States where you move in with your fiance or your boyfriend before you get married, that's very bad. I mean, in biblical terms, that fornication is evil. And
well, that requires a shotgun marriage. Maybe not require, but the father of the bride should be able to say, this requires a shotgun marriage.
You've humbled my daughter, marry her.
Right, but where you have it just continuing and saying, well, it's okay if you just drop it and move on to the next partner, our mores say that's fine, that don't even blink an eye at that. But that is just as bad as plenty of the stuff that Epstein's being accused of.
Right, when I said that Jeffrey Epstein did enough to be put to death, there may be things he did that under current laws that's true for. What I was meaning for sure, though, is biblical law. Because in the end, like you're saying very clearly, we have structured our law to allow a lot of evils to happen.
People want to make him into a monster and saying, well, he's only targeting people that are unacceptably young, versus saying, he was just a pervert who was going after all kinds of women, including ones that were acceptable. But the media just doesn't really want to talk about that. They want to go to the more sensational ones that are more offensive, versus to biblically going after a married woman who's 25 might be worse than 17 and not married.
I mean, and the reason why I think this is worth bringing up is because just as we'll say that people will try to make the evil so great that they can say it's in a separate category, the other thing is like social mores, is we will actually, I think you used the term galvanize, we will galvanize ourselves against certain things. I mean, we've got a few more things to talk about in the section we're on. We haven't even talked about a category that's one of the worst evils that is accepted and that continues to practice. That's far worse than Jeffrey Epstein has ever been. When I said that there were sins he did that are unthinkable, that's a category that we create. We create sins that we say are unthinkable. And there are horrible sins that we make it so we don't think about them. And we should understand that's the nature of our ignoring that evil is just as much of the depravity of man as the actual doing of it.
And I do think, as you go, or as we've been talking, right? I mean, we have to recognize that somebody who has that power, the nature of it, because of their rebellion to God, because of their money, because of the political connections that they have, it actually is very dissatisfying, because you're not rebelling. It's like you want to go fight something, and whatever you fight, it just keeps falling back because there's nothing there, because nobody will stop you. And it's for the same reason that a child, they'll look back to see if their parent's going to do something when they're doing the opposite of what their parent says, because they actually want to fight against something. And what you get is, and Solomon writes about this in Ecclesiastes 2:1-11. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this also is vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven, all the days of their life. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked at all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for wind. There was no profit under the sun. And we have to recognize that some of the perversity, some of the level that a man like Epstein can get, or a man like Hitler, or a man like Stalin, or a man, because what they're doing is they're pursuing satisfaction in the flesh. And that satisfaction in the flesh, they keep not finding it, So then they need to keep escalating and keep escalating and keep escalating. I mean, this is how you get Ravi Zacharias opening massage parlors that are basically houses of prostitution. I mean, this is a guy who's like, he really wants to find something to push against, something to express his hatred for God, and everybody's just falling in line with him. And so it's just, there's a sense of hopelessness that drives them to go further than they would go otherwise, because it all just seems so empty. And that's the nature of sin, and that's the nature of evil. And when the society puts constraints on it, it actually gives them something to fight against, which actually constrains their evil, because they need something to fight against. Otherwise, they have to keep escalating until they hit a wall that they can't go through. They'll just keep escalating. And as a society, when we embrace evil, there's a reason why you accept sodomite marriage, and then they switch and they have to do something else, and they have to do something else, because the real goal is to fight. The real goal is to resist God and to say, I will not submit. And if you don't give them something to not submit to, they'll keep going until you finally hit a societal more that you go, stop, we're not going to go beyond that. And Jeffrey Epstein, it's pretty hard to argue that he actually got to that point, because you look at like what the Palm Beach police did and the report they got, and basically the Attorney General of Florida gives him a pass and will just do this thing. And I mean, Palm Beach police chief, there was a letter in the files, and he was very upset with the fact that nobody would do anything in Florida to stop him. And so we shouldn't be surprised how it continues to escalate from that point, because they literally would not stop him.
Yeah, what you're saying about men wanting to push back against things. I remember it was however many years ago when Miley Cyrus went to the music awards and kind of I think it was like when the twerking thing first started. Like, she did this, and it was very in a risque outfit in front of the audience. And so there was this Camille Paglia, who's a writer. She's a lesbian. But she tends to write actually fairly thoughtful pieces about culture. She kind of wrote this article, and she was talking about how it was like, it's like art had reached its lowest point because there's nothing to push back against anymore. She was talking about how, like, Madonna needed the church, and she used the church to push against, because there was something to rebel against. There was something to create this dissonance between they're saying this is wrong and I'm saying I want to go do this thing. And she's like, but when we lose that, you just become a person just acting obscenely. And there's lots of shades to what she's doing, because you can even see how wrong she is in a sense, but you can also see that there's an awareness of exactly what you're saying. Is there is this quest for someone tell me where the lines are, someone tell me what's right and wrong, and we just pretend like that's not true.
And the reality is Madonna was mostly pushing against the Roman Catholic Church, so they were feeding off each other.
Right.
They were not like, there was no righteousness involved at all. They were just both feeding and trying to, but they still put up resistance for each other so that they could both head to greater depravity.
Kind of building on the thoughts that you were talking about, there's this part of it where, when you get everything that you want, what do you do next? What do you do with your time? People will say, like, man first asks, I need to eat. What am I going to eat today? And then they actually have enough food to eat today, and they say, where do I want to eat tomorrow? And, what foods do I want to eat in the future? And then there's a point where you go, what's next? I mean, when you look at the dissatisfaction of people who actually make it in the world, sometimes one of their dissatisfactions is there's only so many top-notch restaurants, and once you've eaten in them all, what's left? What's left to go do? There's not as much variety as you think. And God actually talks about this with Sodom and Gomorrah in Ezekiel 16:49-50. Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw fit. And so when you see the sins of Sodom, I mean, God's saying one of the reasons it arose is they had all the food they could need to eat. They didn't need to go there. They didn't need to work. They didn't need to, they had no need of what they thought of as anything. And they said, how else can we satisfy ourselves? And they turned to greater and greater evils. Instead of looking to say, how can we help those that we have this abundance? What should we use it for? What does God say abundance should be used for? And so you can see that, I mean, America is one of the few countries, I mean, I shouldn't say America. During the COVID epidemic, we were able to shut down a huge number of businesses for over a year. And we didn't starve. And so, I mean, America is very much, we should think of ourselves as being, we're in the same place in a lot of ways as Sodom and Gomorrah. We have abundance. We have idleness. What are we doing with our abundance?
And we're choosing to change societal mores, which is exactly what Sodom and Gomorrah did. They chose sodomy to be a good, a greater good rather than being evil. And so this is the nature of man, because again, some of the like you said, some of the most basic constraints are, I need to eat today. That is the greatest constraint on evil. I need to eat today, because you have to go work. Because if if for a certain class of people, like the majority of people in the world, they have to work, and if they don't work, they won't eat. And so that constraint of having to eat, that's huge constraint in terms of their behavior. And there's even a proverb about this. Proverbs 38:9. Remove falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. The rich go, this is Deuteronomy 32 as well. The rich go, who needs God? And then they want to play God, and they want to go, I'm a God, so everybody has to submit to me as God, and everybody has to worship me. And then you want to see how far you can go to have them worship you. How many disgusting things they can make you do. Can you be, in the book of Esther, can you be the king that has all the virgins in the kingdom come to you? Right? I mean, this is the picture. This is what it means when you go, who needs God? And Solomon's going, don't want riches, don't want poverty, because both of them cause you to curse God.
Giving everyone food, no matter what they do, is a way that you actually turn people towards evil.
So when you think of what's the elites pushing right now, right? Minimum basic income. What would minimum basic income do? Minimum basic income would make America filled with greater and greater sin, because people would no longer have the constraint. How about welfare? I've been to inner city where everybody, that has to work to provide for themselves, they're out at work, and everybody that doesn't, they're sitting around smoking pot because they have a welfare check. Welfare produces, because there's there's fullness of idleness, abundance of bread, because, and people go, oh, but that's not abundance. It's enough that you can easily survive if you're willing to eat things that are cheap.
You can literally settle for.
You can settle for. And what they do then is they just pursue sin. And this is incredibly destructive.
Right. If you tell people you can have, you can get paid and you can have a living if you work, I don't want you coming doing these things. I don't want you to come here acting in this way. I mean, this is one of the constraints that happened, that having to hold down a job puts on you. There are people who would prefer to be drunk all the time, but they actually want a certain standard of living. And they go, I have to not be drunk all the time. And we've talked about this. There's a whole episode on total depravity. I mean, these are the things that we want to suppress the truth about.
And you can just put 10 or 15 young men someplace where then they don't have to get food, where they don't have anything to do, so they'll be bored. A good chance at some point,
right?
Trouble will happen.
Yes.
Because they, well, how about this? Oh, well, how about this dumb thing?
Yes.
Young men do a lot of stupid things.
Yeah.
Young women do too. But their category of stupid things are
the child left to
category.
himself, and then a young man who's a companion of fools. And so you leave him by himself, he's a fool. You let other people hang around him, now they've become companions of fools. I mean, a series of bad events that will happen from that.
But I do think we really need to consider just how selective our outrage is. Because, people are getting very upset about Jeffrey Epstein. But, last week, the Archdiocese of Brooklyn was working to come to a settlement with 1,100 child abuse cases. 1,100 child abuse cases. That's on a different scale than Epstein. And how many people say, I'm going to stop following a pope who causes children, little boys, to be sexually molested?
Right.
And they go, Jeffrey Epstein's bad. And who's saying Jeffrey Epstein's bad? Most of those people are Catholics. And they won't hold their own church the same standard that they're holding Epstein to. Because there are many, many Catholics that are in the media. And they're looking, and, like Megyn Kelly would be an example. She called Jeffrey Epstein a monster. And yet she's a Roman Catholic. How could she say Jeffrey Epstein's a monster without saying her parish priest is a monster? Well, she might stop being a Catholic now because they charged her to annul her marriage. Not because they molested 100,000 children across the world. That's not a reason to reject the Pope. But the fact that they charge money, that's a reason to reject the Pope? This is where we are as a society. We choose in how many of our Supreme Court justices are Roman Catholic? How are they going to complain about Jeffrey Epstein when we embrace this stuff that is just such horrible things? And I think I looked today, it's like 245 priests in Brooklyn. 1,100. There was one point, there was 518, and this is over years, but you're not talking about something that basically everybody there that was in the priesthood didn't know about. This is not a secret. Everybody knows about it. And will they do anything to stop the rape of young boys? Of course not. Will they even say, how can you be Roman Catholic? Of course not. But then they say how evil Epstein is. At least Epstein's not blaspheming the name of God.
I mean, let's be clear. The Pope claims to be able to dispense grace, right? I mean, like,
he claims to be Jesus Christ on earth.
Which should be the power to overcome sin. So
that is pretty much the definition of grace.
So how can these priests do this? I mean, in other words, there's a part where you go, I don't think the Pope has the power he says he has. I think he's a liar. You know what I mean? I mean, there's like you said, we end up just saying we don't care about that. We can't afford to be outraged.
When I started to look at this, I was thinking about, who's worse, Epstein or the Pope? And there's really no question. They're on a different scale, like on orders of magnitude different, that
right.
The Pope is worse than Jeffrey Epstein. But you look at these things, and the numbers are like staggering. In Ireland, they have 15,000 victims of child molestation by priests. And I'll tell you what, when you're going against the priesthood where they can excommunicate you and you think that will send you to hell if they excommunicate you, don't think that's everybody that came forward. Because anybody that still believes in Roman Catholicism, they probably won't come forward. Those are the ex-Catholics. So in Ireland, the most Catholic country in the world pretty much, 15,000 ex-Catholics came forward. What about all the rest?
And you said right now there's only about
2,000 priests in Ireland. And they have 15,000 victims. There's not a chance that the priesthood didn't know about it. There's not a chance the cardinals didn't know about it. There's not a chance the Pope didn't know about it. We just keep deceiving ourselves and pretending like these people aren't so much worse. But hey, they blaspheme the name of Christ. And guess what? A lot of people want to blaspheme the name of Christ that are the elite power brokers in this country. And because of that, they won't call Roman Catholicism for what it is. It's far worse than Jeffrey Epstein.
He could have been maybe a cardinal.
Instead, he'd be like a parish priest.
One priest. Okay, I was saying.
Yeah, maybe a senior priest, whatever they're called. You probably know the term.
A Monsignor.
Monsignor, yeah. Yeah. But you look in how many parents still send their boys, and you were telling me earlier that now girls, when I went to Roman Catholic Mass, there were no girls involved.
Well, you're older than I, Dan.
I know, a lot. Sometimes it feels like even more than a lot. But these parents, after knowing that, and they've already, in Brooklyn, I think they already settled like 1,000 cases. So this is a new settlement. They've already paid $100 million in damages. And so, but how many parents still send their children and go, oh, it's an honor to be an altar boy or an altar girl. And they send their children into a situation where they know this has happened so many times before. And it's not, it's Boston was the first one, but Louisville, Kentucky The percentage of priests, it's like Australia. They're all over the place. Just look for sex scandals in the church, the Roman Catholic Church. They're all over the place. The Pope knows about it. The Pope has been facilitating this. This is the structure of the Roman Catholic Church. And it's not just the rape of young boys. There was an unwedded mother's facility, right? Because the Roman Catholic Church does a lot of charity work. This is what I hear all the time when I talk to Roman Catholics. We do a lot of charity work. They had a home for unwed mothers that had a home for unwed mothers that had 800 carcasses of babies that they killed after they were born. And they were only open for 30 years. This is another place in Ireland. And this is the Roman Catholic charity. They're murderers, they're rapists, and we go, oh, that's the church.
They don't believe in abortion.
Right, so they just murder the baby after they're born.
And I think, to come back to where we started, the point of this is not to say that you're like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein was a great guy. No. He was terrible. But it's kind of, we gave those examples earlier of, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, is we do have to look at things in the magnitude of which they happen and have some reality to it and know that, again, coming back to, we would all go down that road maybe to some degree without the constraint of the Holy Spirit.
If we had no constraint, but yeah.
Without the constraint of the Holy Spirit, and certainly even the constraint of the world around us.
The world is always looking to give us an outlet for our rage that is away from anything that actually does anything about sin.
Jeffrey Epstein's dead. Everybody raging against Jeffrey Epstein won't affect the John Podestas of the world, where there's lots of suspicious things about him. They won't affect all the Roman Catholics that are supporting Roman Catholicism. They won't affect all the elites that are in power now. Jeffrey Epstein's dead. He's the perfect scapegoat. Because get him to turn away from looking at any of the other people that are involved, any of the other people that are doing things, get them to just look away. And so there's very much selective outrage. And you look at this, Congress is holding hearings on Epstein. How many hearings have they had on the Roman Catholic Church scandals? This is structured, institutionalized pedophilia that has gone on for decades.
Oh, and let's not forget, the Pope today is probably weaker than he's ever been. And the Pope is the head of the Vatican, which is a nation recognized by the UN. So he has agents that have diplomatic immunity. He had, just like Jeffrey Epstein
and
didn't
presidents
have
that go and they debate whether to kiss his ring or not.
Right. And so, the level of authority, we're talking about very, very recent things. There's no telling over time what's been done. They've had so much more power in the past. Just shamelessness.
Well, we have a good idea what went on, which is worse than what's going on now. Right. There has been, the Reformation actually caused some light to come into the church, and you see how utterly vile it was, the Roman Catholic Church. Wicked people want to act wickedly. And what they also want to do is they want to push against constraints while they don't want to have constraints. They want to keep pushing until they find a constraint. And then, so all of a sudden when they're afraid there's a constraint, what they want to do is shift it. And that's part of what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein. Not that people, he's an evil man, but the level of evil is minor compared to the millions of babies that get murdered. It's minor compared to the false worship of the Roman Catholic Church. It's minor compared to the sodomy of the Roman Catholic Church. That's embraced and institutionalized, and they're protecting these people decade after decade after decade, where they'll take a priest from one parish and take him to another parish so they can molest more boys. This is the Roman Catholic system. And we're turning around and talking about Jeffrey Epstein. The government has a responsibility to deal with all evil, but you really have to deal with the greater evil, right? If you see somebody murdering somebody and somebody that's stealing a newspaper, you go after the murderer, not the guy stealing the newspaper. But if you can get headlines about stealing the newspaper, and I know Epstein did far worse than that. I'm not dismissing what Epstein did in any way. But a lot of times what they want to do is go, look, we're really chasing this guy that stole the newspaper. And they don't care about the person who's committing the much greater crimes right in front of them that they consider to be outside of the law, right? I mean, the Roman Catholic Church is pretty much outside of the law in America. There's very few police departments that will go up against it.
And I think we also should be aware that the issues in the Roman Catholic Church are not just unique to them, because when these things come up, I'm sure they don't say, in their, deliberations, well, as we all know, we're just an evil organization that does evil things. Let's see how much evil we can get away with. I mean, it's the same thing. I'm sure they're using the same excuses that everyone else uses. So, I mean, you should be prepared, even in a church that is a, doctrinally sound church. Hopefully it's a lot less common, but it does come up. And people try the same excuses. Oh, do you not believe in repentance? This person is sorry. Do you want, you're going to destroy their life when they're repentant? How about we just fire them and just let them move on, and then we punish them and just let them live their life. If you bring this up, you're going to bring such shame on God's name. We can't do that. We need to cover this up. Or isn't really it? How can you blame the person? Weren't they being tempted by this younger person? I mean, all the things are what the excuses they use, and so we can't let those fly in the situations that we may encounter one day.
Oh, I mean, ARBCA, I don't know if it was 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it was at a Association of Reformed Baptist Churches where they had a pastor, Tom Chantry, I think, who was... That was like 1998 or something, I think, wasn't it? I was thinking, yeah.
15 years ago, right?
20 years ago? Was that 30 years ago? Anyway, 20, yeah. It was I couldn't remember when it... ago. But they basically, I was thinking that so that happened, parents found out, it came forward, and the church said, hey, this is, we're going to investigate this. The ARBCA is going to investigate this.
Do not report it to the police.
Do not report it to the police. And parents complied. You know what I mean? They said, okay. And the law said, I don't know if, I'm not 100% sure that it was true in that area. I would be shocked if it was not, because in most areas it is. The law typically has it as that you are required to report things that deal with child abuse. And the parents in that church stayed silent. Things were kept hidden for years until finally some things came out. There was a case. It was very hard getting people to testify. Things were very old. I mean, this, like Joshua was saying, this happens at Reformed churches that have, Reformed in their name, where people go, I don't know what the right thing to do is. I don't know if we should tell anybody. We know people who know about child abuse that happened at a church, and the elders would not let anyone in the church talk about it, ask questions. They said it was none of their business. I mean, this is the sort of thing that goes on in many, many places, and you have to be willing to stand up to evil.
And one thing that I think is important to mention there is that these things happen, but to push for Baptist church polity. That when you have it so that each church is responsible to its own congregation, the advantage is you can't build a huge structure that promotes these things. You can't have 19 or 15,000 molestations like there are in Ireland. That is because of the structure of the Roman Catholic Church. So when you have independent churches that are independent, that yes, churches mess up all the time in dealing with sexual sins, like all the time, but it also, at least it doesn't percolate up and expand and everybody agrees. And then, because if you have two Presbyterians, and I'm saying Presbyterian like elder, not like capital P Presbyterian, you have two elders and one is told, hey, yeah, you committed adultery, but we're kind of going to forget that. And they're connected with each other, because they're the ones that actually have the power. That other one's going to do the same thing if they don't know Christ. And then another one is, and another one is. And then all of a sudden they're going to agree that if you're a Presbyterian, if you're an elder, right, if you're part of the presbytery, well, there's a lot of pressure. So this is just going to become kind of acceptable. Not among the laity. They still get put out. And this is how you see the Roman Catholic Church where it is. And there is an advantage to having each church be an independent body with its independent authority, because it can't spread. It's the virus doesn't keep spreading, but it's so easy to see how the virus spreads in the Roman Catholic model.
I mean, and one of the things I was also going to say is, a lot of people look at people in authority and go, they were unwilling to stand up for the truth. And that's fair. Be very aware. I've been surprised at how many people are unwilling to stand up for the truth for their own children, for people in the church that they care about. It is very easy to judge someone else who has authority, and you don't use the authority and the power that you have. There are things, we had things going on in our family, and the number of times when I told people about it that we went to the police, they went, well, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have said anything. These kind of things, they happen all the time. And the answer is no, you have to be willing to do what God says you have to do. And so you should ask yourself, am I willing to do that? Because you have no basis to be angry at any authority if you're not willing to stand up for the truth. You just go, well, we're just both hypocrites. And that's just something, it's very common. And until you're willing to stand up for the truth, you shouldn't expect your leaders to, because your leaders are going to be, everybody's going to abuse your leader for doing that. And if they're not saved, why would they do it? Why would they risk themselves?
The difference in those two situations you just described is, do you fear man or do you fear God? Psalm 19:9 says, the fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. If you're fearing man, then you're going to say, well, how's this going to affect my family? Or what are other people going to think of me? If you fear God, you say, what does God say? Well, that's what I have to do. I don't have a choice. That's what I should do.
And the rise of the perversity in this country very much tracks with the changing of the church from saying, fear God, to Jesus loves you. And we shouldn't dismiss how significant of a change that is. Because the reality is, it's very clear if you look at the behavior of most people in churches, and I'm not talking about sound churches, I'm talking about, most professed Christians in America
large, right?
Are Roman Catholic. But even in sound churches, there's plenty of people like this. But there's no question that most people who profess Christ in America are not saved. And you have all these people that they go, Jesus loves me. If they went, God judges sin and casts people in hell for eternity, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, it has a real constraint that's different than lying to people and saying Jesus loves you. Instead of his anger, his wrath is on the wicked every day. We say Jesus loves you. And when you do that, that is the biggest constraint that you can put on people, is to teach them they must fear God. And if you remove that constraint with lies like the American church has done and spread it through the world, the whole world becomes unconstrained. As always, in these podcasts, we usually come back, it's the church's fault. The church is not willing to say, fear God. Right? This is the whole duty of man. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is man's all. And the church won't even say to fear God. And if you don't fear God, the church will rapidly embrace more and more Jeffrey Epsteins. Remember what happened in Jerusalem, right? You have, like Ezekiel, have the vision where he digs into the temple, and there's all these evil things there, and all this idolatry, and all this worship, and all this stuff. And this is the American church, because they said, we're circumcised, we're saved. And so they eliminated the fear of God, and that leads you to just really evil and wicked places. And that's what the church has been actively working to do in America, the professed Christian church. We need a lot more fear of God if we want to stop the sinfulness of man from expanding to fill all the space it can, right? It's like the evil of man is kind of like leaven hidden in a lump, that it will expand until it squeezes out as far as it can in whatever container it's in. Church needs to start making a smaller container for people.
And thank goodness for the Holy Spirit who does come, who is doing that work in the world. And so, that is.
And for a Christian, stops the leaven of sin from growing in their life. It
right.
Like completely solves the problem. But when we shine forth enough light, you can still put the sin in a container. And with Jeffrey Epstein, the church did a really bad job of doing that. But not just with him. Especially when you have these reporters that know this stuff. with the Roman Catholic Church. Everybody knows it, but we go, oh, good, he's a Christian that was on the board or on the Supreme Court. Right? It's pretty much all Catholics and Jews on the Supreme Court. Why? To be a Catholic or a Jew means you don't fear God. After all, for the Catholics, God has to obey Mary. Why do you need to fear Christ? Just pray to Mary and Christ will obey her.
Or Charlie Kirk.
Or Charlie Kirk.
That's Megyn Kelly. I'm not trying to bash. That's not Charlie Kirk's fault that Megyn Kelly prays to him.
Charlie Kirk doesn't pray to Charlie Kirk.
Right.
The church needs to start looking at people and recognizing that we all have the capacity to be a monster like Jeffrey Epstein, unless the Holy Spirit works on our heart. And the church has a real responsibility to stop the monster that's in every unbeliever from coming out by shining light, by being salt, and by preaching the fear of the Lord. Thanks for joining us.
This has been The Conquering Truth, a project of Reformation Baptist Church. If you found this helpful, you can visit us online at theconqueringtruth.com and subscribe here or in your favorite podcast app. Thanks for watching.